Stop right there." The guard's voice cracked through the air like a whip, sharp enough to slice through the music of the carousel just beyond the gates. His hand shot out palm flat, blocking the three brothers as if they were intruders, not paying guests. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tight with barely contained hostility. "You three aren't coming in here," he growled, his voice low but loud enough to draw curious stares from the crowd behind them. The triplets froze, tickets clutched in their hands, smiles fading. They blinked at him in disbelief. "What do you mean?" one of them asked, his tone shaking between confusion and anger. "We bought these online. We saved up for months." The guard stepped closer, his shadow swallowing the excitement that still lingered in their faces. "Don't play games with me. I said you're not coming in. Not today. Not ever." The words hung heavy in the air. Families paused mid-step. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking why those young men couldn't go inside. The mother hushed him quickly, her eyes darting to the scene. One of the brothers' voices cracked with fury. "We haven't even done anything. Look, our tickets, our IDs, everything is legit." He thrust the papers forward, his hands trembling with a mix of rage and humiliation. The guard didn't look down. Instead, he sneered. "I don't care what you've got. Rules are rules, and you three don't belong here." A murmur rippled through the waiting line. The sting of those words wasn't lost on anyone. Some people frowned, uneasy. Others looked away, pretending not to hear. But the triplets heard every syllable, each one pounding against their hearts like a hammer. "Don't belong," their mother repeated, stepping into the confrontation, her voice trembling with disbelief. "These are good boys. They came here to have fun, like everyone else. You can't just—" "I can," the guard snapped, cutting her off. His voice grew louder, harsher. "And I just did. Now step aside before you make a scene." But the scene was already made. The triplets felt the sting of 100 eyes burning into their backs, some full of pity, others full of suspicion. Their joy, their anticipation, all of it shattered in an instant. One of the brothers clenched his fist so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, to fight, to demand the justice that was slipping from them. But another subtle glance from his twin, steady, quiet, pleading, held him back. Not here. Not like this. The guard's words echoed, louder than the rides, louder than the music, louder than their pounding hearts. "You don't belong here." It wasn't just about a theme park anymore. It was about everything they had been told in whispers, in stares, in closed doors throughout their lives. And now, standing at the gates of a place built for joy, that truth had become a weapon aimed directly at them. The gates glittered under the sunlight like a promise they could not touch. And as they stood outside, humiliated and furious, the question clawed at their hearts. Why us? Why always us? The answer would come soon, but it would come from someone they least expected. "Please, just tell us why." The eldest of the triplets spoke softly, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. His ticket shook in his hand, not from weakness, but from the fury he fought to control. Behind him, his brothers stood tall, mirroring the same disbelief. But the only answer he received was silence. The guard's cold stare was a wall, harder than the iron gates behind him. Around them, parents pulled their children closer, as if the three young men carried danger in their skin alone. A mother whispered, "Don't look," before dragging her little girl through the turnstiles. The girl's balloon bobbed in the eye, a cruel contrast to the heaviness pressing down on the triplets. Inside, a roller coaster roared. People screamed with joy. Music spilled out of loudspeakers in cheerful melodies. Each sound cut deeper, reminders of the life they were being denied. One of the brothers tried again. "Sir, we've done nothing wrong. Look at our tickets. We're just here to have fun, please. The guard didn't even reach for the slips. He tilted his head, almost sneering, and muttered, "Move along, you're holding up the line." The crowd shifted. Guests grew impatient, muttering about delays, their eyes darting toward the triplets as though they were a spectacle, not people. "They're not even listening to us," the second brother whispered, his fists clenched at his sides. His twin leaned closer, trying to steady him. "Don't. Not here. That's what they want." But the sting was unbearable. Their mother, standing a few steps back, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She had raised her sons to be strong, to rise above cruelty. But watching them humiliated so publicly felt like watching their very spirit being ripped apart. "Excuse me," she finally called out, her voice ringing above the noise. "We have a right to be here. My boys have tickets like everyone else." For a moment, hope flickered. Perhaps the staff would listen. Perhaps someone in authority would step in. Instead, the staff at the booth looked away, avoiding her gaze, as though ignoring the injustice would erase it. One of them shuffled papers unnecessarily. Another adjusted her headset, pretending to be too busy to care. The silence screamed louder than any words. A man in the crowd chuckled under his breath. "Probably troublemakers," he said to his wife. She frowned, but she didn't disagree. The triplets heard it. Every word sliced deeper than the last. It wasn't just about being denied entry anymore. It was about being stripped of their dignity in front of strangers who were eager to believe the worst about them. The youngest brother's eyes burned, not from tears, but from rage. He refused to show. "Why us?" he whispered. "Why is it always us?" His question went unanswered. The line moved on. Families streamed past. Children laughed. A boy with cotton candy skipped happily toward the rides, his fingers sticky with sugar. The smell of fried dough filled the air, sweet and inviting. It was everything the triplets had dreamed of, and everything being stolen right before their eyes. The eldest took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. "We saved for this. We worked for this. And you—" He glared at the guard. "You're taking it from us, without even telling us why." The guard didn't flinch. "That's enough," he barked. "Step aside." And with those words, the humiliation was complete. The triplets stepped back, their shoulders heavy, their joy crumbling into dust. The park's gates gleamed like mocking gold, shining with promises meant for others, never for them. This wasn't just stolen joy. This was theft of dignity, carved into their souls under the gaze of 1,000 strangers. But humiliation has a way of sparking something deeper, something stronger. And in the shadows of the crowd, someone was already watching, someone who would not let this injustice stand. It began with a whisper. At first, just a single voice, low enough to be mistaken for nothing. But soon, the murmur spread like a ripple across still water, each word heavier than the last. "I heard they broke a rule. Probably a dress code violation. No. They looked like trouble the moment they walked up." The triplets stood frozen at the gates, their tickets still clutched in their hands, as the storm of rumors swelled around them. The words weren't spoken to their faces, but they didn't need to be. Every hushed comment carried daggers, slicing through their dignity. One of the brothers clenched his jaw. "Do you hear this?" he muttered, his voice laced with fury. "Every word," his twin whippowiz whispered back. "They don't even know us." A woman in line shook her head, loud enough for others to hear. "You can't just let anyone in. This is supposed to be a family park." Her sentence was like gasoline poured on fire. The triplets exchanged desperate glances. Their bond, their silent language, was all they had left to hold on to. One brother's eyes pleaded, "Don't react." Another's gaze answered, "How can we stay silent?" Inside the park, music played. Children screamed with joy, and laughter soared. Outside, the air thickened with tension, pressing on the triplets like an invisible weight. A father pulled his son closer and whispered, "Stay back. Don't get involved." His son looked up, confused. "But Dad, they didn't do anything." The father hushed him quickly, eyes darting nervously toward the brothers. The sting was unbearable. Accusations without evidence, judgment without cause. Every rumor twisted into a story that painted them guilty before they ever had a chance to speak. Finally, the youngest brother broke. His voice was steady but sharp. "Is this what you all think? That we're here to cause trouble? We just wanted a day of fun, like the rest of you." The crowd went quiet for a moment, caught off guard by his defiance, but then, as though to bury his truth, the whispers surged louder. "Why are they making a scene? See? I knew something was off." Always playing the victim. Their mother's hand touched his shoulder, steady but trembling. "Don't waste your breath on them," she said softly. "They've already made up their minds." The triplets stood side by side, united in silence once more. They felt like they were standing not in front of a theme park, but on trial, an unspoken jury all around them, convicting them with nothing more than prejudice and assumption. Every laugh from inside the park now felt like a cruel reminder. Every glance from strangers became another blow. The injustice wasn't just at the gate anymore. It had grown into the air itself, heavy and suffocating. One brother whispered almost to himself, "Will the truth ever come out? Or will this be just another story they twist against us?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Because in that moment, the truth wasn't strong enough to silence the rumors. Not yet. But as the tension swirled around them, unseen eyes were watching. Someone who could change everything. Someone who had the power to make the whispers stop and replace them with a voice that no one dared ignore. The air was thick with whispers, each one sharper than the last. But then another voice rose, trembling at first, then steady with fire. It was their mother. "Enough," she said, her tone cutting through the noise like a blade. "Enough of this." She stepped forward, her figure framed by the harsh sunlight reflecting off the park's silver gates. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with righteous anger. She placed herself between her sons and the guard, her body a shield, her voice a weapon. "These are my boys," she said, her words carrying both pride and pain. 3 young men who have worked hard, saved hard, and dreamed hard just to be here today. They have done nothing wrong, nothing but exist in the skin they were born in. The crowd shifted. Some shuffled uncomfortably, eyes darting away. Others stared, curious, sensing something greater than an argument at a gate. The eldest brother lowered his head, humbled by her courage. His fists slowly unclenched, as if her voice had pulled him back from the edge of despair. The guard stiffened, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of her words. "Ma'am, this isn't about—" "Don't you dare!" she snapped, her voice breaking but unrelenting. "Don't you dare tell me this isn't about what it so clearly is. If another family walked up here, any other family, you would have smiled, scanned their tickets, and waved them through. But you didn't. You stopped mine, and you can't even explain why." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman holding her child looked away, guilt tugging at her features. A teenager in the line whispered to his friend, "She's right." He didn't give a reason. The mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't falter. "Do you know what it does to a mother to see her children humiliated? To watch them stand here, not for what they've done, but for who they are. Every whisper, every stare, every baseless accusation. Do you know how deep that cuts?" Her voice cracked, and for a moment the silence felt sacred. The second brother placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Mom, it's okay," he whispered, though his tone betrayed that it wasn't, that it would never be okay. But she shook her head, refusing to back down. "No, it is not okay. It has never been okay. And if I stay silent now, then what lesson am I teaching my sons? To bow their heads and accept injustice? To swallow their dignity just so the world feels comfortable?" Her words landed like thunder. The crowd shifted again. Some people crossed their arms defensively, unwilling to face the truth. But others leaned in, their curiosity transforming into empathy, their doubt into unease. For the first time, the triplets weren't standing alone. One man near the front muttered, "She's right. They didn't do anything." The guard's jaw tightened, his authority slipping with every second. He barked, "Ma'am, step aside before this goes any further." Her chin lifted high. "No, not this time." The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. It was the silence of a crowd on the edge, some ready to look away, others ready to stand. The triplets stood behind her, their bond unbroken, their pride slowly returning. They weren't invisible anymore. Their mother had made sure of that. But storms don't end with a single clap of thunder. They gather, they build, they grow darker before the light breaks through. And as her plea hung in the hot afternoon air, something else began to stir, memories and scars long buried, shadows of a past the brothers thought they had left behind. The silence after their mother's plea weighed heavy. But as the crowd shifted and the guard's eyes hardened, something deeper stirred inside the triplets. Memories. Not fresh wounds, but old scars. The eldest blinked, and in the reflection of the park's gleaming gates, he didn't see his own face anymore. He saw a boy, himself years younger, standing in a classroom doorway. His shoes were scuffed, his backpack too big for his shoulders. And still, before he spoke a word, the teacher frowned and asked, "Are you sure you belong in this class?" He had smiled back then, forcing his lips to curve, swallowing the sting, because children weren't supposed to answer back. But that memory, long buried, clawed its way to the surface now. The second brother clenched his fists, flashes of his own childhood pressing into the present. He remembered being followed through a corner store at 13, the clerk's eyes trailing him down every aisle. His friends had laughed it off, but he had felt the heat in his cheeks, the shame of being marked guilty before he even touched the shelves. And the youngest, he remembered the basketball game, the one where the referee whispered to another coach, "Watch that one. He plays rough." But he hadn't even stepped onto the court yet. His crime had been written in his skin long before the first whistle blew. Now, standing outside the theme park gates, all three brothers carried those memories in their silence. Each humiliation, each dismissal, each small theft of dignity stitched together into a tapestry of pain they had tried for years to ignore. The eldest broke the silence, his voice low and strained. "This isn't new. This has been happening our whole lives." The second nodded slowly, eyes dark with the weight of truth. "They see us before they know us. And once they see, they don't want to know." The youngest's voice trembled with anger. "And, no matter what we do, it's never enough. Not polite enough, not quiet enough, not safe enough." Their mother's hand, still resting gently on one shoulder, squeezed with unspoken grief. She knew their pain. She had lived it long before them. The crowd around them buzzed, uneasy with the growing tension, but to the brothers the noise faded. They weren't hearing the whispers anymore. They were hearing the echoes of every insult, every suspicion, every door slammed in their faces. It wasn't just about being denied entry to a park. It was about being denied entry into spaces of joy, of belonging, their entire lives. And today, this moment, felt like the breaking point. The eldest straightened his shoulders, his voice steadier now. No more swallowing it. No more pretending it doesn't matter. His brothers looked at him, and in that instant, their bond was more than blood. It was shared struggle, shared scars, shared defiance. The guard's eyes flickered, sensing the change in them. The crowd leaned closer, as if waiting for the next spark. And deep inside, the triplets knew. This wasn't just another wound. This was the moment everything they had endured converged, a lifetime of shadows pressing into one furious, unshakable truth. The park could shut its gates, the whispers could grow into storms, but they would no longer stand silent. Because injustice has a way of feeding on silence, and silence was no longer an option. The air around them grew still, heavy with anticipation. Something was coming, something bigger than humiliation, bigger than rumor, bigger even than the pain of the past. It started with one voice. "Why won't you let them in?" a man called from the back of the line. His tone wasn't aggressive, just bewildered, but it cracked the fragile silence that had hung in the air. The guard stiffened, pretending not to hear, but then another voice rose. "She's right," a woman said, pointing toward the triplets' mother. "They showed their tickets. Why are they still standing out here?" Heads turned. The whispers that once condemned the triplets now began to shift. Doubt, curiosity, even sympathy spread through the crowd like a growing flame. And then came the unmistakable sound, a phone camera clicking on. One person raised their phone, then another, and another. Within moments, half a dozen bystanders were recording. The blinking red lights of cell phone screens glared like watchful eyes. Whatever was happening here was no longer private. It was being captured, documented, shared with the world. The triplets exchanged quick glances, a spark of realization in their eyes. They weren't invisible anymore. Their humiliation had been a silent wound a moment ago, but now it was becoming a spectacle. A father near the gate raised his voice. "Is this how you treat paying customers? Is this how your park does business?" The staff behind the booth shuffled nervously. Their eyes darted between the cameras and the guard. Their carefully rehearsed smiles faltered. The guard barked, "Everyone mind your own business. This doesn't concern you." But his words only poured fuel on the fire. A teenager shouted back, "If it doesn't concern us, why are you blocking them for no reason? That does concern us." The crowd erupted in murmurs of agreement. The eldest triplet took a deep breath, lifting his chin. For the first time that day, he felt the tide turning. His voice carried, steady and unbroken. "All we wanted was to come in. That's it. We followed every rule. We paid like everyone else. And yet, look where we're standing." His words landed like stones in a pond, rippling through the crowd. The youngest added, "If this can happen to us, what does that say about this place? What does it say about all of you?" The tension snapped tighter, phones angled closer. Strangers leaned in, capturing every flicker of emotion. A woman, near the front, whispered, "This is going online, right now." And suddenly the balance shifted. The triplets weren't just three young men being silenced. They were witnesses to their own injustice, amplified by the lens of the world. The guard's authority faltered. His voice wavered as he barked, "Stop filming! Put those down!" But no one listened. One bystander smirked. "Too late. People need to see this." The brothers stood taller, their shoulders squared. For the first time that day, shame gave way to strength. They weren't bowing their heads anymore. They were meeting every camera, every stare, with unflinching resolve. Their mother's voice broke through again, proud and defiant. "You wanted to humiliate them quietly. But look around you. The whole world is watching now." And she was right. The staff whispered frantically among themselves, their polished routine, their controlled smiles. It was unraveling. Nervous glances, hushed voices, and shifting feet betrayed their fear. They hadn't expected this storm. But storms don't ask for permission. They gather, they swell, they consume. The crowd was no longer passive. People were demanding answers. Some shouted, others pressed closer. The line was forgotten. The park's cheerful music now felt mocking, a soundtrack to a confrontation spiraling out of control. And through it all, the triplets stood shoulder to shoulder, their bond unbreakable. They had endured whispers, judgment, humiliation. But now, the narrative was changing. The eyes of strangers, once full of suspicion, now carried outrage, support, recognition. And yet, as the storm gathered, one figure had yet to step forward. One presence who could shift this scene from chaos into something unforgettable. Someone was watching, waiting, ready to decide the fate of not just the triplets, but the reputation of the entire park. And then, the crowd parted. At first, no one noticed him. He stood at a distance, half hidden in the shifting sea of bystand. But the way people's eyes began to flicker toward him, hesitant, curious, shifted the air. A man in a crisp suit, dark sunglasses, and a quiet confidence that didn't need words. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't flustered. He simply moved forward, each step slow and deliberate, as if time itself adjusted to his pace. The whispers turned into silence. Phones still hovered, but no one dared breathe too loudly. Even the guard, who only moments ago barked orders with rage, faltered when his eyes landed on the approaching figure. Because this wasn't just anyone. This was him. The owner. The self-made millionaire whose name was etched on the banners at the park entrance. The man whose story of rising from nothing to everything had been told in newspapers, podcasts, and business magazines. And now he was walking straight toward the chaos at his gate. The triplets felt their stomachs tighten. Their hearts beat like drums. Was he here to defend them, or was he here to protect his staff and his image? The eldest whispered, That's him." His brother swallowed hard. What if he sides with them? The youngest clenched his jaw. Then the whole world will see it. The millionaire stopped just a few feet from the guard. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence carried more weight than any shout ever could. "What's happening here?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp, cutting through the tension like glass. The guard straightened, stumbling over his words. "Sir, I was just enforcing the rules. They don't belong here." "Don't belong." The millionaire tilted his head, his expression unreadable behind the dark shades. "And what rule have they broken?" The guard hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed. He stuttered something about policy, behavior, and safety, but each excuse wilted under the millionaire's stare. The crowd leaned in, their silence a pressure cooker. The triplets stood shoulder to shoulder, holding their breath. Finally, the millionaire turned. For the first time, his gaze settled on the brothers. He looked at them not with suspicion, but with an intensity that felt almost searching, measuring. One of the triplets stepped forward, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "We bought our tickets. We followed every rule. And yet we were stopped here, judged before we were even given a chance." The millionaire didn't speak right away. His silence was deliberate, heavy. He let the moment stretch until the crowd's unease thickened into anticipation. Then he exhaled slowly. "I see." He took off his sunglasses. His eyes, sharp and calculating, swept from the triplets to the guard. then to the crowd still recording every second. The tension was unbearable. Would he defend his employees, the face of his park, or would he side with 3 young men standing against humiliation? No one could read him. Not the staff shifting nervously at the booth, not the bystanders clutching their phones, not even the triplets, who stood tall but braced for another wound. The millionaire's voice was calm, almost too calm. This park carries my name, and I will decide who belongs and who does not. The words dropped like stones into water, rippling uncertainty across the crowd. The triplets felt their stomachs sink. Their mother closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer. The guard smirked faintly, believing victory was his. But the story was not over. Because the truth, the real truth, was about to be revealed. The world seemed to hold its breath. The millionaire stood still, his sunglasses now tucked into his jacket, his eyes fixed on the 3 brothers before him. His presence commanded silence, so absolute that even the carousel music behind the gates felt muted, distant, irrelevant. Finally he spoke. "You," he said, his voice calm yet thunderous in its weight. "Tell me, in your own words, what happened here?" The eldest brother stepped forward, his heart pounding so loudly he thought the cameras might capture it. He took a breath, his voice steady but edged with pain. "We came here like everyone else. We bought our tickets, we stood in line, and when it was finally our turn, we were stopped. No reason, no explanation. Just stopped." The youngest's voice cut in, raw and defiant. "And humiliated. Right here, in front of strangers who were ready to believe the worst about us without even asking why." The crowd shifted, uneasy, but no one dared interrupt. The millionaire's gaze never wavered. Then he nodded once, slowly, almost like a judge considering a verdict. "And you," he turned to the guard, "your explanation?" The guard swallowed hard. "Sir, I was just enforcing the rules. I thought—" His voice trailed off, his excuses collapsing under the weight of the moment. "You thought." The millionaire's voice sharpened. "But you did not know." The guard lowered his head. The cameras zoomed closer. And then, the twist. The millionaire turned back to the brothers, his expression softening for the first time. "I know exactly who you are." The triplets blinked in shock. Confusion swept across their faces. He continued, his voice carrying for all to hear. "I know you because I read about you. 3 young men who worked double shifts at a diner to pay for your mother's medical bills, who earned scholarships through grit, not handouts, who volunteered at shelters on weekends when you could have been anywhere else." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The whispers that once condemned the triplets now twisted into disbelief. "You think I don't pay attention to stories like yours?" The millionaire pressed on. "You remind me of myself. I built this park from nothing. I know the fight, the struggle, the humiliation of being told you don't belong, and when I see it happening again, under my own roof." His voice rose, echoing like thunder. "I will not stand for it." The triplets stood frozen, their breaths shallow. Their mother's eyes welled with tears as her trembling hands covered her mouth. The millionaire turned to the crowd, sweeping them with a gaze that made everyone flinch. "All of you, remember this moment. Remember how quick you were to believe the worst, how easily whispers became judgment. And know this. My park is not built on exclusion. It is built on joy, on dreams, on belonging. And they belong here as much as anyone else." The silence that followed was deafening. The guard, pale and defeated, lowered his head. The staff behind the booth stared at the ground, ashamed. The cameras captured everything. The fall of arrogance, the rise of truth. And then, with deliberate steps, the millionaire turned back to the brothers. His voice softened once more. "Gentlemen, today you are not denied entry. Today you are my guests of honor." The crowd erupted, not in whispers this time, but in applause. Some clapped out of relief, some out of shame, some out of genuine admiration, but the sound was undeniable. The triplets stood taller, no longer invisible. Their pain had been seen, their story had been acknowledged. But this wasn't the end. Because what the millionaire had just revealed was only the beginning of something far greater. A reckoning. Not just for the staff at the gates, but for the culture of the entire park. The applause had barely faded when the millionaire lifted his hand, and the crowd fell quiet once more. His gaze swept over the park entrance, over the trembling staff, over the strangers clutching their phones. His voice carried, low and deliberate. "This," he began, pointing toward the triplets, "is not an isolated moment." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some lowered their phones, suddenly aware that they were no longer just spectators, they were witnesses. "I built this park on a promise," the millionaire continued, "a promise that every person, every child, every family, could walk through these gates and feel joy. But somewhere along the way, people I trusted have broken that promise." His words struck like thunder. The guard swallowed hard, his face pale. Behind him, 2 staff members fidgeted nervously, their eyes darting anywhere but forward. The millionaire's voice sharpened. "Do you think this is the first time I've heard complaints? Do you think this is the first time guests have been mistreated, silenced, or judged unfairly? No, I've read the reports. I've seen the emails. Families turned away without reason. Parents writing me letters, begging for answers they never got. And I'll admit it, I didn't act soon enough." Gasps rippled through the crowd. For an owner to admit failure so publicly, it was unthinkable. "But today," he said, his voice rising, "I will not stay silent. Not another day. Not another hour. Not another second." The triplets stood frozen, their breaths caught in their chests. Their humiliation had turned into something larger, something seismic. Their pain was now part of a reckoning that stretched far beyond them. The millionaire stepped closer to the guard, his voice cutting like a blade. "You had the power to welcome them. Instead, you chose to demean them. And in doing so, you revealed the truth about yourself, not about them." The guard looked down, his shoulders sagging under the weight of shame. The millionaire turned back to the crowd, his tone fierce yet resolute. "To everyone here, and to everyone who will see this video online, understand this. Silence is complicity. Looking away makes you part of the problem. This park, my park, will not survive on silence." Phones trembled in hands, recording every word. Parents held their children tighter, some nodding slowly, understanding the weight of the moment. The owner's voice softened, but its power didn't fade. "These young men are not just guests denied entry. They are a mirror, a reflection of how quickly we choose suspicion over compassion, judgment over humanity. And it must end. Today." His words lingered in the hot air, heavy and unforgettable. The triplet's mother covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes burned with pride. Her sons stood taller, no longer shadows at the gates, but symbols of something far greater. The millionaire raised his hand once more, his final words echoing like a vow. "This silence has been broken, and it will not return. Not while my name is on these gates." The crowd erupted, not in whispers this time, but in thunderous applause. Some clapped out of relief, others out of shame, but all of them felt the weight of truth. And yet, as powerful as those words were, the moment was not finished. Because what came next would transform not just the triplets' day, but their entire future. The air was still charged from the millionaire's words, The silence he shattered now replaced with thunderous applause. But then he did something no one expected. He stepped toward the triplets. The crowd leaned in, phones raised higher, recording every heartbeat of the moment. The millionaire extended his arms, not as a businessman, not as a figure of authority, but as a man choosing humanity over pride. And then he embraced them. The eldest brother stiffened at first, caught between disbelief and emotion. But as the embrace tightened, his guarded posture broke, and he allowed himself to breathe. The second brother's eyes filled with tears, a weight lifting from his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying all these years. The youngest swallowed hard, the rage that had burned in him all afternoon melting into something softer, something he hadn't dared feel until now. Hope. The mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her lips. The crowd, stunned, fell into a hush before erupting into louder applause, cheers echoing off the steel gates. Click, flash, click. Cameras snapped from every angle, and the image of 3 young black men once humiliated and cast aside, now held in a public embrace by the man who owned the very gates that had denied them, was etched into memory. It wasn't just symbolic, it was revolutionary. The millionaire spoke, his voice steady, but filled with warmth. You belong here, not just as guests, but as a reminder of what this place must stand for. Joy, fairness, respect. The triplets exchanged glances. Their despair, which only minutes earlier had felt like a prison, began to crack open. Light slipped through those cracks, fragile but real. One of them whispered, almost to himself, "Is this really happening?" His brother answered quietly, "It is. And everyone's watching." The crowd cheered louder. Strangers who once whispered suspicion now shouted support. Children clapped, mimicking the excitement of the adults. Even those who had doubted at first now found themselves swept into the moment. The transformation was undeniable. The boys were no longer victims. They were honored, elevated, a symbol of change unfolding in real time. And deep within, they felt it, the shift from despair to cautious hope. The weight of years of humiliation didn't vanish, but for the first time it felt lighter, as though it no longer belonged solely to them. Because now, the world had seen. The world had witnessed. The millionaire released them, but the impact lingered. His gesture had spoken louder than any policy, louder than any apology. It was a turning point not just for the brothers but for everyone watching, inside the park, outside the gates, and soon, across every screen where this moment would live forever. The mother wiped her tears, whispering, "Thank you," her voice breaking with gratitude and relief. The millionaire nodded, but his eyes carried a storm. This wasn't the end. There was still much to confront, much to rebuild. And he knew the next step had to be bigger, because a public embrace was powerful. But true healing required action. The embrace still lingered in the air, but the millionaire knew words alone weren't enough. His voice rose again, this time carrying not just authority, but something far rarer, vulnerability. "I owe you more than an apology," he said, turning toward the triplets and their mother. "An apology recognizes the pain, but action begins to heal it." The crowd leaned in, every phone recording, every eye locked on him. The triplets stood tall, their faces tense with disbelief. Their mother clutched her chest, bracing for what came next. The millionaire reached into his jacket and pulled out 3 gleaming cards, embossed with the park's crest. He held them high for all to see. "These," he declared, "are lifetime passes. From this day forward, you and your family will never again wait at the gates of this park. You will be welcomed as honored guests." The crowd erupted in cheers. Applause thundered against the steel gates, bouncing back like a wave of vindication. The triplets stared at the cards, stunned, as though they were holding more than passes. They were holding dignity restored. But the millionaire wasn't finished. He turned back to the audience, his voice steady, echoing with conviction. And more than that, I am awarding these young men full scholarships, funded personally, not by the park. They deserve not just entry into a place of joy, but entry into a future of opportunity. Gasps broke through the applause. A murmur of awe swept through the crowd. Some parents wiped their eyes. Children clapped without fully understanding, sensing the gravity in the air. The eldest brother's lips parted, but no words came out. The second brother pressed his hand against his face, fighting back tears. The youngest whispered, "Mom, did you hear that?" Their mother couldn't answer. She collapsed against her sons, her sobs loud enough to pierce the cheers. She clung to them tightly, as though afraid this moment would vanish if she let go. The millionaire's expression hardened once more, turning toward the staff. "And as for this park, change begins now. Policies will be rewritten. Training will be mandatory. No guest will ever be denied entry based on prejudice again. Not while this place carries my name." The staff shifted uncomfortably, shame burning on their faces, but the crowd roared in approval, chanting, cheering, lifting the moment higher. The triplets stood at the center of it all, not as victims anymore, but as symbols of resilience. The humiliation that had once pressed on their shoulders had been replaced by something else: acknowledgement. Their despair hadn't vanished, their scars hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, their wounds had been seen, honored, and treated with dignity. The eldest brother finally found his voice. "Thank you," he said quietly, though the microphone of the cameras carried it for all to hear. "Not just for us, but for what this means for everyone after us." The millionaire nodded solemnly. "Healing takes time, but today we begin." The applause surged again, filling the sky with sound. For the triplets and their mother, it wasn't perfect closure, but it was the beginning of something new. And as they stood together in the spotlight, embraced not just by the millionaire, but by the crowd itself, one truth became undeniable. The story had turned. The wound was not erased, but it was no longer ignored. And the gates that once shut them out now seemed to stand wide open, not just for them, but for anyone who would walk behind them. The gates that once slammed shut now creaked open. The triplets stood still for a moment, their mother's hand clasped tightly in theirs, as if the weight of the day had to be acknowledged before they could take that first step. The cheers of the crowd swelled behind these. But in that instant time slowed. The boys, once humiliated, were about to walk into the very place they had been denied. And they would not walk in bowed. They would walk in proud. Hand in hand, they crossed the threshold. The sun struck their faces, illuminating them like a spotlight, their silhouettes framed against the towering rides and colorful banners. The crowd erupted again, applause rolling like thunder. Strangers cheered their names though they didn't know them. Cameras followed every step, capturing their entrance as though it were history in the making. The eldest brother glanced at his twin and whispered, "We made it." The youngest replied softly, "Not just in. We made it through." Inside, the laughter of children no longer stung. It lifted them. The music no longer mocked. It welcomed. The smells of cotton candy and popcorn, once a reminder of what they were denied, now wrapped around them like a long-awaited embrace. Their mother's tears streamed freely, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of pride. She squeezed her son's hands, her voice trembling but steady. "Hold your heads high. You are exactly where you're meant to be." And they did. They walked tall, their shoulders squared, their faces radiant with a quiet defiance that had transformed into triumph. The humiliation had not vanished. It never would. But it had been rewritten, reshaped into something no one could take away. The millionaire followed behind them, his presence firm but respectful, letting the family lead the way. His vow still echoed in the air, that this place, his park, would no longer be a site of silence or exclusion. And as the triplets walked deeper into the park, the crowd continued to film, to cheer, to witness. The story was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt the sting of being told you don't belong. The camera lingered on their faces, the eldest's solemn strength, the second's quiet resolve, the youngest's fiery hope. 3 reflections of resilience, walking together into a future brighter than tea. He passed they carried. Because discrimination has the power to strip away joy in seconds. It can humiliate, it can wound. But truth spoken aloud, can rebuild that joy. Courage can restore it. And when dignity is returned, it does more than heal one family. It lights a path for generations. The triplets paused near the carousel, the same music that once sounded cruel now playing like an anthem. They looked at one another, silent but connected, knowing they had become more than guests in a park. They had become a symbol. And then the final words, spoken not by the millionaire, not by the guard, not by the crowd, but carried by the narration itself, heavy, haunting, unforgettable. What would you do if you saw the gates close on someone else's dream? The screen fades to black,